You guys are pretty good at this. You guys are pretty good at this. Now, if anybody has any doubt that you belong, just raise your hand because we'll just all huddle around you. Right there. Let's get back here. Let's get back here to Johnny. We want to make him feel like he belongs. You're good. You're good. You're good. So I want to spend a few moments with you today. Now, if you've been in Sunday school, I just want to say this. A lot of this in Sunday school, you've probably heard a lot before, but that's okay. We talked about this morning, Stan brought up, is repetition. Like, why do we feel like we have to rush on to something else? Why don't we spend a little bit more time just camping out on some scriptures? And what's nice in Sunday school, we get the luxury of doing that whenever we feel like it. And that's the class felt that way this morning, didn't they, Brandon? They was like, you know what? Stan brought it up, and everybody else jumped on it. It was like, we don't want to rush through this. Let's camp out on this one just a little bit longer. And so we're in a particular part, and we camped out on it. So this part here, if you've been to Sunday school, you've heard some of what we've taught before, but that's okay. You get to hear it again, and you can jump in and participate if you would like. But the focus today, these are the scriptures I'm going to be focused on. Now, I'm going to try to stay centered on just a couple of scriptures that are captured in John chapter 14, 1 through 6. We're going to try to stay centered on just a couple of those. But there are so many scriptures that support and back this. So I thought, what is the nice thing to do at the end? I have a slide that I will share. You're welcome to take a look at it, copy it down. I can send it to you if you'd like. That gives and I just hit the tip of the iceberg on the amount of scriptures that support what we're going to talk about this morning. So my goal is to stay centered in John chapter 14, 1 through 6, specifically John chapter 6. So what do John 14, verse 6. And what do we know about that scripture? Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. And no one comes to the Father except. That's right. We know that one. If you look up statistics, that is one of the most quoted scriptures in the Bible. We're very, very familiar with it. It's not strange, and it's very meaningful for us. But I want to look at, before we go into that, I'm going to do a couple of things. So number one is why was this statement Jesus made so profound in that very moment that he said it? He had an audience. Who was his audience? His disciples. So why was that so profound in that moment that he made that statement to them? We're going to look at that. This was a group of Jewish men who would have learned Jewish ways and Jewish terminology. And he makes this statement. There were lives that would have learned, their whole lives actually, these guys would have learned from various rabbis that there is a way to God. That phrase, the way, was not a foreign term to them when Jesus said it. It's a very familiar term to them. They would have learned it. They would have heard it. Pharisees taught the way. Rabbis taught the way. They would have learned that God's word is considered truth. They had a thing called Emet Torah, which means Torah is truth. They would have known that. The terms that Jesus said would not have been foreign to them. They also would have learned and been passionate about returning to the communion of God when you could go to the tree of life. So when they heard the word life, they would have understood that. These were not foreign terms. What did Jesus change about that statement that was so profound to them that it would have been absolutely pivotal in that moment? We're going to look at that. So before I do that, I want to give an illustration. Now, I do understand, as Ryan Curtis used to say, every illustration breaks down at some point, but I want you to work with me on this illustration. Now, if I do a good job landing this illustration with you, the rest of what we walk through will all connect. If I do a bad job of landing this illustration, I'm just going to blame it on you. So I'm good either way. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about, somebody just see a flash, or was that me? Okay. Whew. Okay. I was like, uh-oh, something's happening to me. How many of you have ever been lost? Now, I'm talking about physically lost. I think we've all been spiritually lost at times. How many of you have ever been physically lost? How did you feel? Scared? Terrified? Helpless? Man, I have felt that. I was, Carla, Jacob, and I had decided to go to a hiking trail. Oh, yep. Somebody already heard it. We decided to go to a hiking trail. Now, okay, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm being a sexist when I say this, but as a guy, I don't need a map, okay? I don't need to look at the map. I don't want the map. There's a map at the front of the trail that says, go this route. And I'm like, I looked at Carla. She's like, maybe we should look at this and spend a couple of minutes on it. I'm like, nah, it's a trail. Like, it's a hiking trail. What could happen? And so, and I had, by the way, I had been on that trail before, which is, I am terrible with directions, but you still have confidence in my ability to get to where I want to go. And so the three of us set out on this journey on this trail. Now, this trail was only meant to be maybe a couple of miles, somewhere around there. And as we looked down, we realized we've been about 4 miles. And we're like, this is not right. Something's messed up here. That map. Oh, that map. That map got me. And Carla, she goes into this whole different mode of thinking. Now, again, as a guy, I was thinking, we'll figure it out. Even though I'm sweating, we already we were out of water, and so we're like, okay, and it was hot, and we're like, okay, we got to think of something. So Carla's reaction was, you know what? I don't know what's ahead of us, but I know what's behind us. So we're going to turn around and we're going to walk this thing back, and we're going to get back. Okay? Now, in that moment, I had already destroyed any credibility that I had with the group, so we followed her direction. And we hiked back the 4 miles that we were on. When we got to the map, we looked at it, and we realized we were only about 50 yards from actually finishing the trail. So being lost is not fun. It's not a fun experience. But you know what? I got to thinking about this from a spiritual standpoint. I don't want to live a life of simply not being lost. I want to live a life with a destination. I'm going to say that one more time. I think sometimes we settle for not being lost. But what if we stop doing that and we start trying to live a life because we have a destination? This church in Fort Smith, Arkansas, right here at this address, I don't know what the address is, I know it's on Hendricks, but right here at this address, the people sitting beside you, we have a purpose and a destination. Right here, this church has a purpose and a destination. What if we all locked arms and started marching towards that destination? That we make the impact. That we make the impact. Well, one of the things I know that you have to not be lost is going to be a map. Now, I learned that. So somebody's like, yeah, now you say it, Kevin. Earlier you wasn't admitting that. How many of you remember back in the days of paper maps? You remember paper maps? And I think about those sometimes on my journeys. Sometimes you go by like really, really old service stations, and you might actually spot a few of them. But you remember the paper maps? My grandfather used to have just a collection of it. He was the coolest guy ever because he had all these paper maps. And because he'd been to a lot of different places. And I remember us kids would get in his office and we would unfold these maps. Have you ever tried to fold back a map? You have to have an engineer degree. And so he would get so irritated with us that we would not get his maps folded correctly. But his maps had all these details on it. had all this information. Do you guys remember the maps? I think you could get them in a book, and they had layers on them. That you could layer on things. You could add stuff to it. And I remember my grandfather had one of those, and I would look at his map, and like the map, I was like, okay. And then he put a layer on. I was like, wow, that got a little bit harder. And then he put another layer on. I was like, wow, that's a little bit harder. And pretty soon, when you added all the layers, that map becomes very complex. It's a complex system. So if I was to talk to you about maps, when you think about the disciples, they would have understood the way. The way is the map. They would have understood that. They also would have understood that over time, many layers had been added to that map. And so the map, while good and true, there was a challenge with that map. Challenge is it's a little bit harder to follow, especially when you compare it to MapQuest. So how many remember MapQuest? I actually think MapQuest may still be around, by the way, but I remember when MapQuest came out. So this is more my era because that's when I really started traveling was with MapQuest. And I remember what I would do. I would go in, and what was the neatest thing about MapQuest that the old map couldn't do, so now I have an upgraded version, right? The map is still true. There's still truth in that map, but now there's an upgraded version, and that upgraded version, Don would let me put in where I want to go and where I am, and it would map me out a trail. And so I would say, okay, now I still had to print it out, and I still had to look at it, and it would give me a step-by-step, turn-by-turn play. So I still had to print it, still had to do all this. And I remember one time I did that, and it was me and my friend. We were on a business meeting, and we were headed to a particular location in Kansas City. And we followed that turn by turn, or at least we thought we did. Turn by turn, turn by turn. And I'm telling you, we got to a spot to where we could clearly see the hotel that we were supposed to be at. We could clearly see it. Like, we got out of the car and was looking at the hotel. But we could not figure out the route down there. And finally, out of frustration, he just screams out to the top of his lungs, like screaming at the hotel, "How do we get down there?" Like, it was so frustrating, we couldn't get down there. So while better, the map is still true. The map didn't change. The map is truth. Okay? And while better, still wasn't the best. The best came when we got something that was in the sky. And that something in the sky is called a satellite. And something changed when something in the sky became involved. Something changed. And today, I'm GPS spoiled. And let me tell you a little bit of what I love about GPS. What I love about GPS is I can put in my destination. And when I'm traveling down the road, it'll tell me, hey, be careful. There's something coming up. Watch out. Watch out, there's something coming up. It'll tell me if there's a car broken down on the side of the road and I need to go ahead and get over. It tells me when traffic is backed up. It tells me when the original way that I was thinking I could go is not available. And so I was using GPS, and I was somewhere in Oklahoma. Who knows? My destination was not in Oklahoma, but I had to go through Oklahoma. I don't know where I was in Oklahoma, but I know I was in Oklahoma. And the highway that I travel, which is the only route that I know, could get me to where I wanted, had to be shut down because there was a major accident. Had to be shut down. And so everything and all my confidence was in the way that I believed I should be going. All of my confidence was there. And I couldn't go that way. And I will tell you, I felt lost for a moment. And I got nervous. And I'm like, I don't know what I need to do. So I was like, I'll go there. And so I turned. And what does GPS do when you do that? Reroutes. And he says, I got you. I got you. I'm going to show you another way. Well, as I was going down that way, I realized, well, that road won't work, so I'm going to have to go down this road. And it says, I got you. Got you. Just follow me. Trust me. It routed me way out. And I'm going to tell you, I was like, this GPS is broke. I'm somewhere in Oklahoma, like Oklahoma's all flat, so it was definitely flat. But it was flat and empty, with the exception of a few cows. And I'm like, this GPS has led me somewhere that it doesn't know. But I stayed with it, and I continued to communicate. My GPS receiver continued to communicate with that which is in the sky. And it continued to communicate and continued to communicate. And do you know what eventually happened? It got me right back on the right track, and I was able to reach my destination. So what is the key part about GPS? It is that it is communication. It's not just instruction. You see, it takes something in the sky to send a signal down, but it also takes a receiver to receive it. And once that receiver receives it, then it also sends a signal back up to the sky. And by the way, I did look up the science on GPS to make sure that my analogy was correct here. So it takes something in the sky. Did it change the map? No. The map is still a source of truth. It didn't change the map. But it changed with not just giving me instruction, but it layered on a relationship. I now have communication that's traveling between these ways. So, that's the illustration. Hold that illustration in your brain as we walk through the next pieces, okay? So I want to do a little stage setting for you. And Stan taught in chapter 13. Daryl also taught in chapter 13 last week. We're going to, of course, start in chapter 14. But I do need to tell you a little bit about chapter up to this point, what's happening. This is happening at Passover. We know it as the farewell discourse. Jesus is getting ready to go away. But there's a lot of cool things happening at Passover. Historically, Passover was a great time of fellowship. This was a happy time. What else do they do at Passover? It rhymes with shmemember. Remember. Who said that? You get the prize. Somebody give Daniel a hug, an extra hug, because he gets the prize. Okay? They remember. And they eat particular foods that triggers bitterness, sweetness. They remember. It's interesting is that this setting, Jesus also said, remember, right? So he was tying in with the customs of that festival. Remember. So they would do that, but they would enjoy each other. Now, during this time, most of the time when you did Passover with someone, it was with your closest friends and family. Now, they had many festivals, but this particular festival, the festival of Passover, it had been a very intimate setting. And we get that. When you read through and you look at what's happening, you even have disciples reclining on Jesus. That would have been a sign of they were relaxed. They were enjoying each other. It was a time of enjoyment. Even Jesus, when he dips the bread and hands it to Judas, did you know that was also a custom that shows I love and trust you? And when the host dipped the bread and gave it away, it says, I have a special relationship and I love and trust this person. You can look it up. It's a custom in Passover that they would do. It's a sign of honor and respect. It's interesting he gave it to Judas. We won't go there. But it was very family. Until Jesus ruins it. He just blows it up. And he says, somebody here is going to betray me. And somebody here is going to deny me. So they went from this very happy. Imagine that. Have you ever had a holiday meal ruined by somebody in your family? You thought about it. Right then you think, yes, and I'm going to tell you something. Like you could tell you thought about it. Jesus ruined the moment that they were having, this happy, joyous moment. He ruined it when he said this. Now, was his intention to ruin it? I don't know. But that's exactly what happened. So from that point, this would have happened. And I just want to look at this scripture real quick. So the moment's ruined. And Jesus sees something, doesn't he? He sees that they're disturbed. They're troubled. Different translations cause it different things. Why were they disturbed and troubled? Well, he just said, some of you are going to betray me and some of you are going to deny me. And they're clearly getting the message, he's leaving us. the rabbi that we've been following that has taught us the way from the source of truth, which is Torah, is now leaving us. Okay, but Jesus says, don't let yourselves be troubled. Notice he didn't say, stop letting yourselves be troubled. What's the difference? It's choice. This indicates that if you're not going to be troubled, you have to replace it with something else. And that's when Jesus says, instead of being troubled, I need you to trust. I need you to trust in God, and I need you to trust in me. Now, have you ever had somebody tell you, just trust me? How does that feel? I've had that. Does it work? If you don't really know that person that much and they say, just trust me. Does that work? I'm like, they're telling me that because they're untrustworthy, right? How do we develop trust? Relationships, we spend time with people, we get to know people, okay? I trust you based on the you I have known, okay? Not the you that you say you're going to be. I trust you on the you that I have known. And Jesus is saying, trust me. You know me. Trust me. Then you'll notice through verses, and again, I'm not going to go dive into deep detail on these, but you'll notice verses 2 through 4, he then provides them hope, doesn't he? So that's all centered on, he's restoring their hope. Like, they're troubled. They're disturbed. You just ruined the holiday here, and I'm troubled, I'm disturbed, and Jesus says, you got to trust me, I'm going to give you some hope. And then Thomas, good old Thomas. Now, we tease on Thomas because we call him Doubting Thomas sometimes. He gets coined that. But he asked a good question. What does he ask? Where are you going? What way are we going to follow now? Why do you think he asked that question? What way are you going to follow? Well, now we get to verse 6. And this is the one we're going to spend our time on. And we're going to walk through this. And as we walk through this, I do want you to think about the illustration that we gave earlier. Between the map, between the source of truth, between finding the way. I want you to think about that. Here's one of the things that we know. You are on a journey. Your journey has not ended. The reason why I know that is you're sitting here and you look pretty alive to me. You're on a journey. Did you know you will choose a map? Or you'll have it chosen for you. But you have a map. You have a way you live your life. You have a way you make decisions. Those are called paradigms. In this one statement, Jesus took a paradigm that they had of the way, the truth, the life, what they've been taught their whole lives. He took their paradigm and changed it in one statement. And maybe that should happen to us as well. So when we think about this, the phrase was not necessarily new. Rabbis across the area would have taught that there is a way to life, and it is from God's Word, which is a source of truth. So when we think about the way, I want to share some things with you. So this statement, the way, the truth, and the life, is all rooted into Genesis. It all comes from there, and it would have been their base understanding of what was being said. So let's talk about the way. Even the church at one time, and you can see it in Acts, even the church at one time was referenced as the way. It wasn't Christians. The people outside of the faith was said they're part of the way. It was even called that. It was called the way. Paul, you can see this in Scripture. Paul actually tortured the way. He did bad things to the way when he was Saul and before he became Paul. So each one of these have connections and roots in Genesis and God's intended communion with man in the Garden of Eden. Let me show you. So there was the way. What was the way in Genesis? Well, here it is. God commands. Man hears. Man obeys. Done. Not hard, not complex. God commands, man hears, man does. That was the way. And their understanding, talking about the ancient Jewish community, their understanding would have been, this is the way. This is the way we work. This is the way. And so rabbis would teach, how do you get to that? How do you do that? Well, you have to follow a source of truth. And the source of truth is known as Torah. And so the way would have been Dereka, and Torah is Emet. I have a good friend of mine who does a ministry called Emet Torah. And that is, Torah is the source of truth. So again, imagine these guys, their entire lives would have been taught that there is a way back to the communion of God like we had in the Garden of Eden. And the truth, the source of truth to get there is Torah, which would be the commands of God. And if you do those commands, you will find the tree of life. So the truth is what encompasses the way, and it gets you to the tree of life. So these three things are all connected to their fundamental and foundational understanding of God. And they would have, and they may not would have used the words map, but they would have considered it a map. So each rabbi taught in a particular way of the way that they wanted their disciples to live out their way. And that they would say, this is the way, and then they would give their interpretation of the commands and say, this is what, they had authority to give interpretation of the commands. The Pharisees also did that. They would say, this is the way, and then they would give interpretations of that. This is the way. Here is my interpretation of the truth, and it will lead you back to the communion and get you back to life again. And this would have been a common way, a common understanding. But how did Jesus change it all? I am. The statement, there is a way, there is the truth, there is life, would not have been foreign. They would have heard it their entire lives growing up. But the moment that he said, I am, that changed everything. Their paradigm went from Thomas's question of, you're leaving us, now who would you want us to follow to show us the way? Their paradigm would have changed the moment Jesus said, I am. I am. I'm all three. You have been following all three. He did not give them a way to cope with him leaving. He gave them a way, a destination. He didn't give them a simple, here's the way not to get lost. He gave them, this is the way you get to victory. He didn't focus on their failure, he focused on their success. It's not just about not becoming lost. It's about having a true destination and knowing that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And that changed everything. So, my message this morning is not meant to be eternal. In fact, I'll never forget my grandfather. One time he got up to preach. His message was probably a total of 5 to 10 minutes. One of the best. I mean, I was a kid. It was the best message I ever heard in my life. Loved it. Okay. But the message is not meant to be. And he got up and he prayed and he says, God, help my message not be eternal but be immortal. And he always taught, he's like, look, a message doesn't have to be eternal to be immortal. In fact, the portion that you can recall and remember will be narrow anyway. So the message today is not meant to be long or lengthy, but it's meant to make a connection for you. So ultimately, what you have here in this one statement, and if I was to title the message today, the message would be this simple. It's a map fulfilled. Jesus did not say the map you were following, the Torah you are following is wrong, it's incorrect, don't do it. He didn't say that. What did he say? When they said, did you come to abolish that? What did he say? He came to fulfill it. How did he fulfill it? Well, they already had instruction, but relationship wasn't there. And so they had to restore relationship. And so I liken it to a map versus GPS. A map is not wrong. The map in and of itself is not wrong. You can follow the map, and some people have, and you can map out your course, and you might do a good job on that. But what I have found for Kevin Dougan, I don't do so hot with that. I need something that can give me constant and consistent communication. That gives me that constant, consistent connection. That when I do take a wrong turn, and I will, it's telling me. And it's also warning me, hey, there is traffic up ahead, or there's some danger up ahead. I need those things. I need that communication. So I really want to just ask you some questions, or maybe just make some statements and partial questions that are in there. As I often think about, why would someone not choose GPS? Well, if you go back to our illustration, let's think about that for a moment. Number one is, I like my maps. I'm not going to change my maps. I'm going to stay with my maps. I don't like this newfangled technology, right? Maybe that's a response. Some people says, I don't trust it. I don't trust it. I'd rather look at it and figure it out for myself. Right. We learned today that we can't do this on our own strength. We have to do it from, I don't need it. I don't need this. I got a map. I'm good. I don't need it. And but when you think about that in also the relationship, now let's make it about Jesus. Why would people not choose that way? Maybe they didn't hear about it. Did you hear about GPS? Did you know there's some people that don't know about GPS, which shocks me? Some people don't know about it. Maybe they need to be educated and told about it. Some people who have never heard of it before, when you tell them about GPS, they get excited. And they're on fire more than you was on fire when you found it. So maybe they haven't heard about it. Maybe that's it. Maybe, Stan, they get the thought of, I don't need it. I don't need it. I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. I've got my map. I'm going that way. I've got it figured out. Maybe they do know GPS, but they don't fully trust it. And so they go back to what they've known or what they think. Maybe. I'm not sure. But what I do know, and I can tell you with great confidence this morning, the GPS is much better than the old folded maps. It just is. And Jesus was saying with confidence to his people that the way, that I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. I am the way to the Father. What you've been seeking to get back to the tree of life, I am that way, and there is going to be no other way to get there. Your maps aren't going to get you there. The ways you've thought about before isn't going to get you there. You got to get on the path, and you got to stay on it with me. I am that way. And that is what Jesus is saying in that statement. So, two things I want to do. So I'm going to ask the praise and worship team to come back up. While they come back up, I'm just going to load this up here for you. You're welcome if you want to do a deeper dive into this material and understand how exactly this audience would have translated the words, the way, the truth, the life. This is only the tip of the iceberg, but it'll get you started. And you'll see that when he made that statement, this would not have been strange words to them. They would have heard these words their whole entire life. But in that very moment, something would have changed with them. It would have been a paradigm shift. It would have changed everything in that moment for them. But before, and here in a moment, I'm going to have the praise and worship team. I charged Casey with something. And I do this sometimes because I believe if you're going to worship, let's worship. Let's do it. Don't sit there and go through a ritual song. If you're going to worship, worship. Just cut it loose and let it go and worship. Just do it. Do it for the purpose of glorifying God, not for your warm fuzzies. Do it for glorify God. Guess what happens? He'll give you something like you've never felt before. Just dive in there and go. And we're gonna get there in a moment. Before I do that, though, I want to talk about Mike Neubauer. And I hope this is okay that I go here. We taught this in Sunday school class. And again, I'm not trying to make a plug for Sunday school class, but we have such wonderful discussions in there as we learn from each other and we grow from each other. And when I was talking about this lesson, I couldn't help. I kept looking over at Mike. And there was this almost like this glow about Mike, and it was like he was going, and he wasn't actually doing it that exaggerated, but I could tell he was getting something. And I'm like, I don't know what he's got, but I want some of that. And I could tell he was getting something. And he came to me after class, and he ministered to me. And I just want to pause there for just a moment. Sometimes we need to minister to each other. I belong. I belong on this journey with you. I belong. We share the same GPS. Sometimes we just need to take a moment and minister to each other. Don't wait. Sometimes you've got that word somebody needs to hear. Share it. Share it. When you've got that word, that loving, encouraging word that you need to share, I can promise you it's not the enemy telling you to do it. Go do it. Mike decided to take a moment to minister to me. Mike is a veteran of the military. And when he heard these words, it triggered him in a different way. And he began to tell me about this thing, and Mike, I'm going to get it as right as I can. Began to tell me this thing they do in the military called the five-paragraph operation orders. 5-paragraph operation orders. And when he began to tell me about that, he said, Kevin, as you were speaking these words, he goes, I began to see this pattern. You see, Mike was in situations where it was war conditions. He had to do things that a lot of us need to be grateful we never have to do. And he began to tell me that I could hear his confidence that he had when he talked about this tool that the military had that would give them the why, the who, the where, the what. He began to talk about that, and I could hear the confidence in his voice as he began to say that. And then he said, and you know what the other thing that we had? Each other. Because the person to my right and the person to the left, the person behind me, all of these individuals have the same orders I have. If I drop the ball, they got me. We need each other. Did you know you're in battlefield conditions? But we have the order. Mike began to break down for me, Kevin, this is what Jesus was saying here. This is the why. This is the who. This is the what. This is the where. This is the support system that he puts in there for us. And as Mike said that, and he was saying it with great conviction, as he said that, I could tell he wasn't just saying it, he was feeling it. And the meaning I walked away with is Jesus wasn't telling his disciples in that moment, nor is he telling you right now, that this is the way to cope with the master who has left you. He wasn't giving them a coping mechanism. He was giving battle orders. It's time to go to war. It's time to make an impact. You don't have to play defense anymore. You don't have to play defense anymore. You've got the solid marching orders. This church in Fort Smith, Arkansas, I say we get in line with that. I say we don't play defense anymore. I say we go on the offense, Mike. I say we look at each other and say, you know the orders, you got the same orders I got, and let's trust each other. Let's be there for each other as we march this out. So Casey's going to lead us in a song, and this song we heard earlier, but I want to talk to you about this for just a moment because I'm going to give you 3 things. I believe you have to respond. I'm going to ask you to, and if you don't, everybody's going to look at you. So now you got to. I'm going to ask you to respond. You have to respond. No response is a response. I want to ask you to respond to this worship song in one of three ways. I believe you fall either in one of these three buckets or somewhere in between. Maybe you're here today and the map you've been using stinks. It doesn't work. It's only led you to pain and heartache and frustration. Even when you think it's right, it's wrong. Because you haven't discovered the way. Maybe. And one of the things, we don't have old-fashioned altars, we have steps. But if you look close enough, I think you might see tear stains on these steps. They work. You are welcome to come up here and spend that time. You may respond. When we sing this song, you may respond in that way. Number two, you may respond in this. I've known the way. I have been on the way. But my signals got kind of messed up. Not his signal to me, but my signal back. Something's not working there. It's fuzzy. I'm struggling a little bit. I have interruptions in my connections with that which is in the sky. I need help. I need help. If that be the case, this area is also open. And when this song plays, I want you to feel welcome to come up. Now here's the third way. The third thing is you can stand to your feet when this song kicks off. And you can say, I know the way. I found the way. I'm on the way. And I am grateful for the God that provided the way. I am grateful, and I am going to rejoice, and I am going to glorify Him. I think you are one of those three or somewhere in between. Everybody in this room. And I think you need to choose which one you want to do. And any one of them is okay. Any one of them is okay because He is the way, He is the truth, He is the life. So I'm going to ask everybody to stand as we go through this and choose one of the three. If you come to this front, sometimes it's always kind of hard. It's always kind of hard to be the first one out there, but there's this thing called the first follower. After the first one, second one's a little easier. By the time you get to the third one, we'll all just come up here. But if you feel like you need to come up here, I trust that there are others that's going to come around you and that will support you and that will pray with you.
Who can compare to you, my King?